What's going on, Packers fans? Aaron Nagler here, joined by Andy Herman, ready to talk some football and wrap up the 2024 Packers season after a brutal loss to the Philadelphia Eagles in the wild card playoff round yesterday. Andy, the floor is yours for whatever reaction you have from that game, because boy, howdy, there are plenty of reactions to be found online. I'd like to get your take, sir.
Oh man, what direction do you want to go in? There was a very slight relief that I didn't have my heart ripped out of my chest during the course of the game, which is usually the default setting for Packers playoff games. So
very fair, very fair. That's a
little
bright
bit of
side
that.
look. I like
This is probably the easiest since the Falcons NFC Championship game, where they just got absolutely annihilated, to just kind of come to terms with right away. Everything about this game was following the same script that it followed in previous losses during the course of the season, which is, I think, what gets to the level of disappointing and frustrating that this game absolutely was. I talked about all season long of like, hey, I think a lot of times it's good that you get some of this stuff exposed. I think we talked about it last week, that you get some of this stuff exposed in the regular season so you can course correct, make the corrections necessary, overcome that adversity, and become more hardened and calloused, and do what you need to do to fix it and correct it come the postseason. That all sounds great, but the hard part is actually fixing it and course correcting it. And it was pretty clear that Green Bay was unable to do so. Obviously the turnovers, the penalties, the interceptions, the missed field goal, just all of it. It was Green Bay losing a game 101, everything that we had saw going
right
into the playoffs. And you hope that would not rear its ugly head. And it literally took all of one play to rear its ugly head in this game, which was super unfortunate. And then you had all the injuries through the course of the game, a little bit of controversy, of course, on that opening play. I don't feel like Green Bay got screwed. I felt like the better team clearly won this game. I would have liked to have seen the butterfly effect if you get a helmet to helmet and Green Bay gets it 1st and 10 on the 45, rather than Philly getting it 1st and 10 on Green Bay's 30. Something tells me that could have changed some things in that game, but I didn't feel like Green Bay again was the better team overall on the day. So I can be at peace with it. But yeah, a lot of emotions, a lot of feelings, frustrated, disappointed, and a little bit confused as to what kind of happened to this passing offense through the course of the season, to have it go from something that looked like it was going to have big play potential, that was maybe going to catch fire at some point, to being something that in these last 3 games of the season, even probably going back to the Saints game, felt nothing like a Matt LaFleur and Jordan Love offense that we had seen earlier over the course of the really about year prior to that.
Well, let's start there because, I mean, obviously there's a lot of ground to cover, and you covered a bunch of it right there. But I think that is most likely going to be one of the major drivers narratively, right, this offseason. And clearly, look, Brian Gutekunst and company don't operate on narratives. They have a football team to build, and they have a methodical way of doing it. But, man, you look at the shortcomings in the passing game in particular, but even just the offense for a team that the defense seemed to be coming on as the season wore on. Certainly one of their best performances in the playoff game yesterday.
Agreed.
But on offense, you've got an offensive coach. You've got this quarterback who you traded up in the first round and sat on the bench for 3 years and then played pretty darn well his first year out of the gate. And then this second season as a starter, I mean, obviously there's mitigating circumstances. There are injuries. Certainly the leaning into the run game, I think, was somewhat unexpected, maybe from the outside looking in, but you would think the run game would improve your passing game, but it did anything but. And those last 3 games in particular that you're talking about, it really seemed like Matt did not have many answers for what ailed the offense. And I think if you put a fine-tooth comb to it, it's 2 things. It's needing more consistency and or more talent, but probably just more consistency at wide receiver and or at the playmaking spots, and you need better play from your quarterback.
Yeah.
And it's easy for me to sit here and say it, but it seems very apparent, which is why it's easy. And that, to me, is where everything has to start, because you have to be supportive of your quarterback to make the game as easy as possible for him, because it's the most difficult position in sports. I'm sure they're going to go over everything with a fine-tooth comb, as Matt said yesterday during the offseason. But to me, each and every decision they make on the offensive side of the ball, from personnel to scheme this offseason, has to be about how can we support Jordan and make things a bit easier for him. Because right now it feels like everything is a struggle, and Jordan certainly struggled last night.
And that's the kind of the strange thing about it, and why I'm still sort of left somewhat confused. And I've not had the opportunity to go through the all 22 in this one yet, but it felt like they, especially end of last year and at times this year, had that rhythm. And Matt, his MO is making things so easy for his quarterback. Like these, whether it's 3-level reads or, scheming somebody open. I mean, even some of the stuff that we saw early in the season where there would be like a fake handoff one way and then they would, just kind of leak the tight end off the opposite side. Like just nothing like that whatsoever. Some of the stuff that they used to be able to do with the bunch formations. And again, I get you have to have certain defenses in order to operate some of that stuff, but some of the stuff out of bunch where there would be sort of these natural pick plays and then you have
Right.
a receiver coming in
Shallow
underneath.
crosser coming in.
Exactly.
Right.
Like just stuff that they seemingly got away from. I don't know, out of necessity or if teams were just, saying, yeah, we're not going to allow that stuff anymore. But it felt like they never really evolved to a place where they had an identity outside of, again, running the football, certainly, but nothing off of it with any sort of consistency, again, that made this Packers offense better. And to your point, this was from Brett Coleman. I don't know if you saw this tweet or not. He did some digging on PFF and looked at true dropback stats. So take out
I
all
did
the
see this, right.
Take
action,
all the play action, RPOs, screen
right.
attempts, everything like that. Just straight dropbacks. 57.7% completion percentage, 15 touchdowns, 15 picks, 7.5 yards per attempt, 77.6 quarterback rating, which would have been 26th in completion percentage, 27th in quarterback rating, and the worst touchdown to interception ratio in those situations amongst starting quarterbacks, or at least eligible starting quarterbacks. That to me is the 1A going into this offseason, as you were mentioning, of you have to figure out a way to make this easier for Jordan, that he can play within rhythm and have that confidence, because it was very clear throughout a good chunk of this season that from a drop back quarterback standpoint, this offense never really got off the ground and never really figured itself out, which also was more frustrating yesterday when you look at how much drop back passing they did in that game without play action, tons of shotgun. I don't know if there were injury situations that led to that or whatever, but it was a very interesting game plan, to say the least.
Yeah, let's talk about those decisions when injuries start striking and Elton Jenkins goes down. How surprised were you, even before the penalties, that they went the route they did at left guard to replace Elton Jenkins? Because I had assumed, I was on Watch Party and I said, I think out loud, I said, oh, so they'll probably, Telford will probably come in. And then it wasn't Telford, who did eventually come in. But were you surprised that they went the route they did?
I really was. It's felt to me all season long that, outside of Jordan Morgan, once he was clearly, I think, the top backup, but outside of him, that they, from Dillard to Monk to Telford to Glover, it was like almost like they had zero preference whatsoever. All four of those guys, if I remember correctly, I believe all four of them were inactive for non-injury reasons at some point this season. Like they just decided.
Monk spent like a month and a half
more, somewhere around there. Exactly,
scratch,
right. So it felt like, again, when somebody needed to come up, a lot of times it was Telford. You thought that Monk was going to kind of be that interior guy. That never really came to fruition. I'm assuming that Dillard, coming off the concussion, the reason why he was inactive was just kind of, whether it was lack of practice time or just giving him an extra week or whatever, that probably played a factor in that. But yeah, as soon as it happened, it seemed clear as day. Yep, here comes Kadeem Telford. I don't know if they have like
was that the first time we saw Glover all year?
He had played, I can check it right now. He had played a handful of snaps in mostly garbage time. That was the first time, I think, in any legit
scenario, right?
Scenario that,
because I remember Telford had come in like once or twice in actual game situations. Like,
correct,
they needed someone to hold up, and he did earlier this year, which is why it was surprising that they didn't go that route right off the bat.
He played 4 snaps against San Francisco at the end of that game, 9 snaps against New Orleans at the end of that game. And both of those were in complete garbage time scenarios. Right. And that was not the case. Again, Telford did get some actual time with the starters at different points of the season. So yes, very surprised. They course corrected probably a little bit too late, but that was another one of those head scratching offensive line decisions. Not that Telford came in and played amazing, but he definitely looked better than what Glover was putting on tape prior to that point.
I will say there was a lot of doom and gloom about the offense for good reason. It was hard to watch last night in particular and much of the late part of the season. But little glimmers of hope, man. How many times did they overcome 1st and 20 last night against the number 1 defense in the land? I mean, there were certainly times when they could have folded, and they battled. And I know no one wants to hear that. No one cares, but I care. And I think that speaks well to Matt and Jordan and the operation and being able to overcome those situations. But man, it is going to be a long offseason for Jordan Love and for Matt LaFleur. I do think everything is going to be focused on ensuring that they come out of the gate humming on offense, because as much fun as it is to watch Josh Jacobs, you know me, I'm a caveman. I am Mr. Run the Ball. I am Mr. Run the Ball with the assumption that it is going to help my quarterback.
Right.
And this year it didn't seem to do that. And you mentioned the lack of play action. That is one of the more mystifying things, not only in this game last night, but kind of throughout this entire season. It has just not been a focal point of the offense. And again, you don't need a successful running game to be effective in the play action game, but having an effective running game certainly helps in that regard. The Packers have one, but didn't seem to be interested in any real way trying to utilize the play action game off of it, which is, again, completely mystifying to me.
The illusion of complexity seemed to be complex for their offense and
Right.
very easy to understand for opposing defenses. Opposing defenses were not fooled, and the offense could not figure out a way to kind of get out of the gates. And I do agree with you. I do think some of the adverse situation offense in this game, the 1st and 20s, things like that. But my goodness, I would really prefer if you didn't have so many 1st and 20s
Right.
in this
That would
game
be
at the same time.
Obvious preference, yes.
that would be ideal. But to your point, when it comes to Matt and Jordan, you mentioned that the spotlight's going to be on them. I would say good. I think they need to sort of figure this out. It does need to be. It opens up a little bit more of Pandora's box of questions of what this offense is going to look like in 2025. What Jordan Love is going to be this next year. I think we've seen a smattering, a scatter plot of data from Jordan that some of it looks unbelievable and really, really good, and other stuff that you're just left scratching your head and being like, well, if that doesn't ever change, that's probably a problem. So like what Jordan Love sort of is in 2025, hopefully, knock on wood, without any sort of injuries, and maybe another playmaker or two along that offense that can maybe give him a little bit of help. And then for Matt, like what this offense looks like for him going into next year, there does need to be an evolution, I think, in some capacity for the offense for Jordan. And it needs to be simpler. It needs to be easier. And we need to see it get back running on, I think, the cylinders that we all think it's capable of, but just, again, never really hit that stride at any point this season. So yeah, those questions are going to be there. And I have full faith in Matt. I have full faith in Jordan. I think they will rise to that challenge, but it's definitely going to be, like you said, a spotlight on both of them.
And then we flip it around to the defensive side of the ball, and Jeff Hafley's crew came to play. And it was frustrating that they got put in the position they did right out of the gate and gave up the touchdown they gave up. But, man, for the most part, not only did they keep them in the game, I thought, on balance, they played winning football last night.
Yeah.
And the thing that you kind of enter the offseason with is, they had this really promising performance. And that is the case. But, man, I remember when Joe Barry's crew had a promising performance against the 49ers a couple years ago. And we spent the whole offseason thinking, hey, we are cooking with gas on defense. And then week 1 shows up and they get absolutely torched in Minnesota. So yeah. I'm not saying it's not great, and it is. I'm very excited. But, man, the work continues, because that is something you can build off of. Everything we saw in that game, from the work up front, Hafley's job that he did with the secondary, that I don't think anyone is under any illusions is filled with tons of superstar talent. You've got one All-Pro in Xavier McKinney, and you're working with a lot of disparate parts after that. I just thought that is very promising, and I'm excited to see what additions and changes get made on that side of the ball, because they seem to have a really good launch pad there.
Could not agree more. And I think a couple things here. One, it's not, I don't think it should be surprising. I think we may have talked about this, that the players that seem to fit perfectly in this defense are the ones that they acquired this season, the Xavier McKinneys, the Edgerrin Coopers, the Evan Williams, the Javon Bullards, like guys that seem to just fit naturally. And some of the other guys took a little bit maybe of a longer time to transition, going from that 3-4 to the 4-3. This is a very similar situation to what happened in Minnesota last year, where they didn't have necessarily the pieces, and it took some time to understand that defense and understand what they wanted to do. And then once all the players understood it in year 2, and they went out and specifically targeted players, Jonathan Grenard and Van Ginkel, and then Cashman and all those guys, they went out and attacked it with guys that they thought would fit that defense. And then all of a sudden, okay, look at what they're capable of doing. And it would not surprise me if we saw something similar, with just the players having a lot better comfort level in this defense. And then secondly, probably a few more pieces, whether it be via the draft or free agency, that specifically fit this Jeff Hafley style of defense, which I think is going to help as well. I look at the game plan in this one. You look at pretty much all the big plays for Philly. Obviously, the play from Carrington Valentine where he gets stiff-armed into oblivion. There were a couple other missed tackles on Saquon Barkley where players were in positions to succeed. There were very few, and I mean very few plays in that game where there was not a defender in a position to make a play or limit the damage in some real capacity. Jeff Hafley had pretty much everyone in a position to succeed throughout the entirety of this game. For a good chunk of it, his players went out and did succeed outside of a handful of plays here and there where, again, there was a misplay here or there. But I thought Jeff Hafley had an awesome game plan. I didn't think Philly played a great game offensively, but I thought Green Bay was a huge reason for that. And I love the way that they attacked Jalen Hurts, Saquon Barkley, and that Philadelphia offense yesterday.
Very much agreed. And I'm glad you brought up the Valentine play because I took two things away from that. Number one is, and I think I said this live on the watch party, man, young man, if you're taking on tight ends, you got to go low. I think that's a good learning moment for the young corner to understand in that situation, you're not winning up top. You got to take his legs out. There's no hope up top against a big guy like that. And the second thing was, and I talked about this a bit on the radio this morning, it was unfortunate to see that call pre-snap on the watch party yelling out saying, well, they're just going to check. I mean, you've got everybody up there. You're showing 0. Everyone's playing off. That is the easiest check in the world for the quarterback to make, and he made it. So my next request for Chef Hafley here is, can we have someone on the defensive side of the ball who has the autonomy to make their check once they see the quarterback check? And I understand there's a lot of communication necessary, etc. Maybe that's something that they work on next offseason because, again, it was one of the more obvious plays in the game, and it ended up becoming a touchdown. It just feels like that's the next step, right? Because they do have really good plans week after week, but it seems this happens quite a bit where quarterbacks are able to diagnose pre-snap, and yeah, they're doing some disguise, moving safeties, etc. But the better quarterbacks and the offensive systems that have it baked in where, okay, I can see these sets and I'm going to make a change, the Packers have to embolden their guys on the defensive side of the ball to make their own changes to try and just keep up because that's just the modern game, right? I understand it's not easy, but that is a requirement in modern football. That's my kind of takeaway from that.
Yeah, I agree with in the fact that you have to be able to sort of check off of their checks and make those adjustments as needed and or just disguise that sort of play a little bit better. Or the other thing that you can do too is if you're just going to say unapologetically, hey, yep, we're bringing it on this play, right, then don't sort of pretend and be like, well, we're going to have Carrington Valentine over here on Dallas Goedert. Like put Javon Bullard over there and or make it a matchup. And like, if you're just going to announce it to the world, this is what we're going to do. Right. Well, then get the matchups at least that you want in those situations anyway, because you're not fooling anyone. So at least don't give them a very obvious mismatch where you have a, skinny, maybe corner that struggles with tackling a little bit on a big physical, I'm going to run through your face tight end. That may not be the matchup that you want in that particular scenario.
No question about it, but I don't want to take the shine off of what Hafley did yesterday because I thought it was outstanding work. I thought he called a really good game too, given what the Eagles kept trying to do. And it was fascinating to me. You talked about the dropbacks for love this year. Last night featured the first drop back pass by Jalen Hurts without play action ever. How amazing is that? I mean, that's kind of insane. And it was complete. So good for him. But that's a crazy stat point to me when you're talking about Jordan Love and dropping back and utilizing certain kind of aspects of the offensive game plan. That was wild to me. I mean, then you kind of Rolodex, wait, have I watched Jalen Hurts play football before? Yeah, I've watched him a lot. And I think they're right. Yeah, I've never seen him do it without play action. So, hey, for, all the stuff that Philly threw at the Packers, I thought Hafley, again, was really well prepared. And the guys from front to back, I don't know about you, but I've gotten a lot of questions about, obviously the offseason personnel decisions and things like that. The one area that keeps coming up, I think the number one priority has got to be something along your defensive front. I don't care if it's an edge player. I don't care if it's a defensive tackle, somebody who gets you instant havoc, right? Yep. I think that's without question my number one. But to me, and this is what I got asked about quite a bit last night, is the cornerback group, where there's been a lot of talk about it because of the Jair situation, the injury there, and then some of the problems they've had playing man, etc. I'm not of the opinion that they need an overhaul like we saw with the safety position last season. But I do think, yes, you have to absolutely raise the talent floor in the room. Like that's just necessary to give, and I think you've talked about this before, to give Halfley more options. Like,
Yep.
because he is a bit hamstrung with the current group, because he knows in certain situations against certain teams with certain talent, going man is a death sentence.
Yep.
So you've got to be able to at least allow him a full palette. And the only way to do that is to raise that talent floor.
My initial thought process, and I've put minimal thought into this so far, but just my initial like 1,000-foot view of how I would kind of handle this. I think they have the money to do something similar to what they did with Jacobs and McKinney this offseason of like, and I would kind of do something similar. Like I kind of want one more piece on defense. I kind of want one more piece on offense.
Yeah.
I ideally probably, we're probably talking wide receiver. I wish that somebody just would have stepped up and taken that mantle. And I wish all of these guys would have stepped up and taken that mantle. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. Now you've got multiple concussions in all likelihood for Romeo Dobbs. You've got an ACL plus probably other stuff for Christian Watson. I like Wicks. I think Reed showed up last night. I think there's still pieces there, but you're probably still a piece short. And I do think if you can get something nearer to that primary wide receiver, everything else kind of does slot into place a little bit more and probably just makes things a little bit easier on Jordan. And then you hit it perfectly earlier with a pass rusher. I could care less if it's interior defensive lineman, if it's an edge rusher, where it is, who it is, how it is. I don't care any of that. But yes, I do think that they need one more piece there. And then I would look at corner. To me, they're probably taking a corner in the first 3 rounds of the draft. I would pretty much put that in Sharpie. And then I think, yes, and I think you probably do another one at some point as well. And then I think you probably look at some sort of, I don't want to say value free agent signing, but somebody that can also come in and compete that maybe is a veteran or maybe has some experience. And yeah, I do think, and I'd love your thoughts on this as well. I do think that the divorce with Jair is probably coming.
Yeah.
I do think Eric Stokes is a bit more of an interesting conversation, but unless he's willing to take something cheap, is probably gone. And you're probably looking at Keyshawn Nixon, Carrington Valentine, a couple draft picks, a sort of value free agent signing, and then a lot of competition at that spot.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Jair's out the door. I mean, I know you probably saw the report today that he refused to talk at locker cleanout, and he legit said, I don't even know if I'm going to be here next year. Well, let me clear that up for you, Jair. You're not going to be here next year. I'm going to be shocked if he's back with the Packers. And that does create a void, right? And to your point, I'd be shocked if Stokes is back as well. I mean, the man has been in and out of the injury tent, so to speak, for years. Finally, the Packers figured out what he's good at, and that's being a depth piece, being a dime back, essentially. He has 1 interception in his entire career, Andy, and that was his rookie year.
Do you know his last pass breakup was his rookie year? He does not have a pass breakup since his rookie season.
That's what I'm talking about, Andy. Like at some point, now look, maybe yes, vet minimum for competition purposes, bring him back to camp. In that regard, it's a possibility, but man, you got to get better at the position. And I don't see how treading water with Eric Stokes helps you do that. So I do think they'll move on there. But because of those departures, yeah, you got to bring in some talent. And I do think, yes, the draft will most likely be the main avenue. And look, you and I both know, who knows as far as who's available right now, because re-signings will happen, tags will be applied. So it's a bit early to be kind of going down the pending free agents who will be released. Absolutely. No question about it. So that kind of mix, so to speak, of who's actually going to be available, you really don't know yet. But I do think there's a decent chance that because it's a premium position, right? The Packers always want to look to the draft. But I also think that if there is a player out there that they think fits the scheme, is young, ascending, maybe hitting his first crack at free agency like we did see with McKinney, then I don't put it past them to kind of lay down some cash. I think they've got some maneuverability with the cap this year. So that wouldn't shock me. But again, we got to see who's available. What's funny is that like we talk about this like, oh, we don't know. Like they know, like they track all this stuff as far as who guys which guys are coming up and with contract bonuses, who are most likely to be cut. And they're so far ahead on that, where now you and I spend this offseason like catching up on that stuff. So I don't doubt for a moment they have an idea, but like sitting on the outside trying to kind of I don't know, sift through it. Like, I got a ways to go yet.
They're on the 2026 draft and free agency
Right.
classes right now as we try to
100%.
get caught up on the 2025 versions of both of those. But yeah, and that's the other thing too is, one of the reasons why I think they were able to be aggressive with Jacobs and McKinney is because they were quote unquote on premium positions, right? Like if you go out and you get a premium pass rusher, that's probably all you're going to have maybe money to spend. Like that's probably it.
Especially
and you
last
can make
season.
If you can make an argument too, sort of similar at wide receiver, depend if you're talking about one of these guys that's going to get 30 mil per season or something, that's it. You're done. But you might be able to look at a really good corner and a really good wide receiver, maybe not a upper echelon, T Higgins or whatever, but a really good wide receiver and a really good corner, add two of those sort of guys at those positions, and then still be, able to upgrade your other positions via the draft and some of the other means. But I think that's going to be one of the interesting aspects of just how they value some of these positions and where they want to spend all that money. Again, if they do want to go pass rusher, that's great. But if they want one of those premium guys, well, and especially if the delusions of grandeur with Myles Garrett or Max Crosby or one of those. Well,
Andy, don't entertain that stuff. You only bring it on when you entertain it. Like, I know. Okay, Myles Garrett will never happen.
No, I know.
The Max Crosby thing, there's like a 2% chance it happens. That's why I'm putting my flag down now.
Fair enough. Here's what we know about Green Bay, right? If any of those guys become available, some other team will undoubtedly outbid Green Bay for their services.
Use Green Bay in negotiations.
Green Bay will never be the one that's like, you want 3 first-round picks and a huge contract? Yeah, we're in on that.
We're right there.
It's never going to be the case. So
absolutely the facts of the matter. Andy, I cannot thank you enough, man. All this offseason stuff, it is time to dive in, and Andy will have it all covered for you there at Pack a Day Podcast without question. Andy, thanks so much for the time. Thanks so much for talking to me after each and every game this year. Really love doing it. And I will not be a stranger. I'll be talking to you soon at some point this offseason.
Can't wait. Thanks for everything, Aaron.